Today I'm going to be teaching on the transformative language of prayer and worship. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, one of the phrases he urged them to speak was, "Give us this day our daily bread." Now, while this phrase was inviting them to seek daily manna for their souls, I believe he was making a connection with bread, the Word, and himself. John 1:14 says, "And the Word, Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory." John 6:35, Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." Thus Jesus, the Word, came down, became flesh, bread among us. What's fascinating about this is when Jesus urged us to pray for daily bread, he was inviting us to pray the Word of God in heaven to be made manifest in us individually and corporately. Why? So his glory would be seen. Just like Jesus, who was the Word made flesh, shows his glory, his communicative presence, we, his people, are called to embody his Word on earth, displaying his presence. Jesus, the limitless Word, wants his limitless words to invade us creatively each and every day. Essentially, he invites us to assimilate the language of heaven in our midst such that it changes how we hear him, how we interpret life, and how we live for him together as his people. This is the language that transformed the early church. And this is why prayer and worship are vital, because they are vehicles by which this heavenly language is brought to the world. So with this in mind, I'd like to look at 3 essentials that will help us harness the transformative language of prayer and worship that I gleaned from this course. They are, number 1, find his story in history. Number 2, treasure his presence. And number 3, expect God's work through his people. Number 1, find his story in history. From the course, Pete Greig said, "The hinge of history is the bended knee." Pete shares a story about this pagan king named in England in 562 named Ethelbert, who decided to build a chapel for his Christian wife Bertha, the queen. She prayed in the chapel for 35 years, and guess what happened? He got saved. But because of her committed bended knee, God did even more, immeasurably. In that same year, monks from Rome came to England, and among those monks was none other than St. Augustine. As a result, Augustine built the Canterbury Cathedral on that site of the chapel, and a great evangelism movement broke out through England and the British Isles for many who hadn't been reached. She just didn't see her husband saved. Her bended knee created the hub for an evangelization of the British Isles, which resulted from 35 years of praying, and we're still reaping the fruit 1,400 years later. The language of heaven was brought to bear on the nation of England, where countless souls found his story in history through the transformative vehicle of prayer. That brings us to number 2, treasure his presence. From the course, Pastor Scott Wilson said that God got a hold of his heart when he told him, "I cannot do my work in the Oaks Church until you allow me to do my work in you." The verse God was speaking to him was Revelation 3:18, which says, "Buy from me gold refined in the fire, and you'll become rich." What was God trying to say to Scott? He was getting him to ask the question, how do you buy gold from me? How do you buy gold from God? The answer he found was, pay the price in his presence. Why? Because he is an all-consuming fire where the impurities will be burned out, where it's just all him. Likewise, in another story, Pastor Jack Hayford said that his church went on a quest searching for his manifest presence for 2 years. And this intentional seeking cultivated the heart's soil such that the church was visited by a display of God's glory and grace that continues still. By cultivating a heart that treasures his presence, the language of heaven came down and transformed a pastor and a church, revealing his glory. Which brings us to number 3, expect God's work through his people. Jack Hayford says, "What begins in treasuring him proceeds to humble our heart, awaken our sacrifice, and release our service. What is birthed in the heart finds expression in the hands, hands that rise in humble praise, give in simple expectancy, and serve with gentle grace." Our prayer and our worship are designed to manifest through our together to the world in a profound way. Pete Greig shares a story about his friend Marcus Legel, a teen in Germany under communism. He got caught up in these prayer meetings against communism in Leipzig and the reunification of Germany. Marcus remembers the prayer meetings amongst thousands of others. On the night of the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were 300,000 people praying with candles to end communism in Leipzig. Afterwards, there was a communist official that said in an unguarded moment that they were prepared for everything, but not the prayers and candles from 300,000 people together. N.T. Wright says Jesus was the one who stood at the intersection of God's space and ours. Jesus is the story who came to complete our story by becoming the sacrificial language of heaven for us, the Word of God with us. It is now our turn as His body to stand together at the intersection of God's space and the world's, to allow the language of heaven to permeate through our worship and prayer for a world that desperately needs Him, as we find His story in history, treasure His presence, and expect God's work through His people.